The following program is sponsored by Tile Lines, and the opinions expressed are not necessarily those of the staff, management, or advertisers of this station.
Time again for Eyes on Washington with your hosts, Marty McClendon and Doug Bassler, as they take a look at the goings-on in government at the local level, along with the national political scene. And now, here's Doug and Marty.
Yeah, every now and then.
Every now and then
You just got to turn on the radio at 5 and listen to Doug and Marty. Just every now and then you should do that. Like pretty much Monday through Friday. Yeah, that's it. This is Doug Bassler, by the way.
And Marty McClendon. We appreciate you tuning in.
Oh, my gosh.
Eyes on Washington.
I'm going to just take a big cold drink of water right now.
On the air. Yeah, so we know that
we
haven't got you trained yet.
So good.
After 3 years on the air.
Of 3 years of not ever taking a drink of water while I was on the mic. But I just felt like it was time for something new. It's kind of the season for new beginnings, new things going on. And it is a refreshing time.
Yes.
I just want to say that because it seems like we've kind of slogged along, kind of like everything's the same old, right? You ever heard that? Same old,
yeah.
Same stuff, different day, that kind of thing.
I have.
But it feels like we're in kind of a time when people are beginning to go deeper than just the surface level stuff. And so that's cool. I like that because, like you and I, we're friends, so we talk.
That's
and
right.
sometimes we talk on the air.
All the time as well. It's funny. I'm thinking because we're heading into a season where, we start thinking about spring again and those type of things, new beginnings. I'm thinking about boats. What do you do with boats? You clean out the barnacles first. You clean up all the yuck. You clean it up. Get ready for the season, whatever season may be, baseball, football, whatever. But
sure,
boating, right? And you see this last year. Seems like there was a whole lot of barnacles trying to be broken off the boat of America here.
Yeah.
So we can get going this year. So it really does feel. I feel a lot of optimism in the air, don't you think?
Yeah, and so a lot of this stuff that we've seen, like the scandals, like
yes.
Like the sexual harassment, explosion that we've had in the last just all this time, and then just all these different, some of them were kind of made up scandals, but just scandals and things like that. I mean, it feels like we're in a transition, and decisions are being made, and they're big ones. They're not like little decisions like America, like we have this little decision, should we, take out, under God out of the pledge or something like that. They're bigger decisions than that because now it's like that really matters, right? Or standing for the anthem or whatever.
Well, all year long, we have programs on here, whether it be Dennis Prager on the station or us. We're talking about the fact that we see sort of this, we see a mobilized movement to destroy absolute truth, to destroy truth in education and politics, and everything goes, and sort of subjective reality and so forth. And you see at the end of the year, we're looking at things like, oh look, these things matter. People want some things to believe in. They want. They don't like this ongoing corruption and just the everything's coming to a head, right? Being exposed. Say no. There should be some kind of value.
Now you were in the medical profession, right? Now you can't just leave things closed up, right? You got to get in there and clean stuff out.
You got to debride it, right?
You got to disinfect it and get all the stuff out of it, all that, in order for it to begin to heal.
Exactly.
So I think a lot of this stuff has to happen. Well, our guest today, by way of telephone, is Dr. Everett Piper. He is actually the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. He's the author of his latest book is Not a Daycare: The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth, and I'm assuming that has to do with colleges. He's also written Why I'm a Liberal and Other Conservative Ideas, and another one, The Wrong Side of the Door. But we're very excited to have Dr. Everett Piper with us today. Welcome to the program. How are you, sir?
Hey, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So I saw you the other day on Tucker Carlson's program, and I think basically the premise was that we're not surprised at all that there's these type of scandals going on, especially in the area of sexual harassment and this type of thing. And your premise was that's not surprising at all. Why is that?
Well, I'm an educator, and as I said to Tucker Carlson on his show, I believe that ideas matter, and what you teach today in the classroom is going to be practiced tomorrow in our culture, and we shouldn't be surprised when we've been teaching sexual licentiousness and sexual license decade after decade in our school systems to find men that are behaving that way and acting licentiously as they engage in culture and with women. In other words, garbage in and garbage out. And when you teach people that sex is a recreational decision as opposed to a moral mandate, you're going to suffer the consequences for it. And who can deny that that's what we're doing in our schools today? You look at schools like Jay, Oklahoma. The middle schools are actually handing out instruction manuals on oral and anal sex and how to engage in those things without getting an STD. And then you have Cherry Creek, Colorado, and Fox Ridge, Colorado, where there's an internet portal that takes middle school kids to homosexual erotica. And then you have Edmond, Oklahoma, where the recommended reading list it engages in and gives students access to rape erotica. The list goes on and on. When we teach this stuff to our kids, we shouldn't be surprised to find men like Matt Lauer and Harvey Weinstein behaving the way they do.
Well, yeah, obviously we couldn't agree more. But the thing is obviously you've done some study and you wrote the book on it. But how did we as Americans, when you poll the nation, we tend to be lean more conservative in values still, and yet allow this to happen in our education system?
Well, I think we gave up. You're being a little bit more optimistic probably than I would be on my industry. I would argue that my industry, education, created this monster. We've been teaching value neutrality and moral relativism for decades. How many times have you heard your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, your nephews say, whatever, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as it works for you? This is the type of nonsense, because it makes no sense, that we've been teaching to our kids. And when they actually think that it doesn't matter what you believe as long as it works for you, when you actually start imbibing those terrible ideas, you're going to start behaving accordingly. And I would argue this goes back to the 50s or 60s when we started teaching a generation that moral issues were relative and moved with culture rather than immutable, enduring, and true. And when we started getting away from those time-tested truths, those self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator, to use our founding and seminal documents as a reference point, when we started getting away from that, we were going to suffer the obvious consequences. In other words, when you abandon truth as the measuring rod outside of those things being measured, you can do no measuring. And that's where we find ourselves in culture today.
And we see it in testing, we see it in the education program, we see it everywhere. We're like, no, that's not fair. That we have to be more inclusive, the smarter balance, the common core, whatever it may be. So, question for you: if it started in the 50s and 60s, which we know it did, we see the sexual revolution, all that stuff coming in, professors growing up in this ideology that's really leftist, and how long would it take to reverse that in the education system? Is it the same thing? Is it going to be 30, 40 years, or is it something we can do in the short term?
Well, let's go back. I think of a question Tucker Carlson asked me on his show, and I really didn't answer it as well as I should have, in my view. He asked essentially the same thing. Well, what would you teach? If you think what we've been teaching is wrong, what would you teach? What I wish I would have said at the time is, I think the first step when you want to cure cancer is to stop consuming the carcinogens that caused it in the first place. So let's ask ourselves a question. Do we have cancer of the heart, mind, and soul? Do we have ideological cancer in our culture? I would argue we do. So what should we do to address this particular thing? I think we should stop consuming the ideological carcinogens that are causing the problem in the first place. In other words, go back and look at the problem and stop consuming these ideas. Stop consuming the ideas of narcissism and self-absorption. Stop consuming the ideas of value neutrality and moral relativism. Stop consuming these things and then assume that you can just put a little Band-Aid on cancer and solve it later on. I think the first step is to stop sending our kids off to these institutions that teach this problem in the first place.
Wow. So stopping that, how? So, Marty and I both Christian guys, whatever. But how do we rebuild? This thing. Obviously, with our own kids, right? Hey, sex outside of marriage, bad idea. Going with teach the Bible. But as a society, have we gotten beyond that? Or is it recoverable?
Well, I think it is. I think we always have to have a crisis before we can actually start taking the necessary action to change course. I don't agree with much at all of what Barack Obama or Rahm Emanuel said or did, but I can say this. in 2008 when Rahm Emanuel said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste," he was absolutely right. We have a crisis right now, so we have an opportunity, and the opportunity is to provide an answer where no one else seems to know what to do. In other words, let's take the high ground. Let's take the high road. Right now, we find this sexual assault pandemic that's going on, which essentially is what? It's a misogynistic attitude toward women. It's an attitude that has acted like women are objects of recreation for the last several decades. Well, what worldview will correct that problem? What worldview has corrected that problem for the last couple hundred years? It's the worldview of the biblical Christian. That's the worldview that treats women like human beings rather than objects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Our guest by way of telephone is Dr. Everett Piper. We're going to be back with more after the break. This is Doug Bassler
And Marty McClendon's Eyes on Washington. I can't wait.
Bob Vila here with my home improvement tip of the day. Stay tuned.
Don't drill me, Bob. Don't drill me, bro.
Too late. You've been drilled. This is Marty McClendon.
This is The Drill, and this is Doug Bassler, Eyes on Washington. Our guest, fascinating guest by way of telephone, Dr. Everett Piper. He is the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. He's also the author of Not a Daycare, another book, Why I'm a Liberal and Other Conservative Ideas, and The Wrong Side of the Door. You can get all of those on Amazon. We do recommend that you go do that. But
Yes.
wait till after the show because you're not going to want to miss this interview.
Well, it's interesting. And welcome back to the show, Dr. Piper. It's the follow-up of the title of the books is The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. You know, we kind of rail on this show over the year about, you know, the fact that there is a truth. There's a standard that if we line up against it or with it, you know, society's better, we're safer, we have safer neighborhoods, we have better families, and many of the ills that we face, you know, even here in Seattle, have to do with broken families, with a culture that says everything goes. You know, it's you know, subjective morality, so to speak, and so you're addressing that, and it's interesting in 2017, 2018 that it would be called sort of out of the norm to actually say this, there is truth. There is absolute truth. There is biblical principles. There is a solution to this. It's about the values that we were founded upon. So, Dr. Everett, welcome back to the show.
Oh, again, I'm honored to be with you guys this afternoon.
Well, now this idea that, and I have to admit that this is something that I have been thinking myself, in this idea that if everything is okay, as long as it's okay with everybody, then everything's okay. But then all of a sudden we have senators resigning over things that suddenly that's not okay. And we have congressmen, you know, with these slush funds, and we have entertainment people being fired and all this stuff. So, but the problem is, what are the rules, right?
Absolutely. And we obviously, perfect lead-in, perfect segue to suggest that everything isn't okay. In other words, even those that claim that values are neutral and that morality is relative, they really don't believe that, because they inevitably will get to a point where they'll say, that's not fair, or you lied to me, or you've done something that's wrong, or there should be a law against that. Even those who claim to be relativists will come to the conclusion where they'll stomp their foot and they'll say, no, that's wrong. And I get in this debate all the time, and I obviously will point to the obvious. Do you believe the Holocaust was a bad thing? Do you believe that Southern plantation owners should have been told to stop owning slaves? Do you believe that racism should be reviled? Do you think that rape is a bad idea? And obviously, even those that are most progressive and liberal will agree that those things are bad things to do and they are bad ideas. Therefore, there has to be an objective standard, an objective system of morality to allow us to have this conversation. Otherwise, at the end of the day, there's nothing but power. And when you get rid of power, when you get rid of principles, power always fills the vacuum.
And power is basically what I say goes.
Or the majority
and
of
it's
those,
relative.
Or whatever.
Or whatever, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and we see these men that have power over women. They use women like objects of recreation. Big surprise. We've been seeing it on Sports Illustrated swimsuit cover edition for the last 20, 30 years. We actually have advertised women as objects of sport, and now we're somehow surprised that men have actually used them accordingly. In other words, again, when you break down the big laws of God, G.K. Chesterton said this, when you get rid of the big laws, you don't get liberty, you get thousands of little laws that rush in to fill the vacuum. I'll say that again. When you get rid of the big laws, you don't get liberty, you get thousands of little laws. And what we see right now is because we can't live by 10 simple laws any longer, and Jesus narrowed it down to 2, because we can't live by 10 or 2, what's happening? Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of little laws are rushing in to try to fill the vacuum, and men are being fired left and right, and there's this call for more what? Laws and legalism to control the human spirit. And if we would just honor the 10 simple laws of God, like Chesterton told us, we'd have a lot more liberty.
I'm glad you said that, too, because we've talked about this on the show before. The idea when you lose these standards, this moral code that we all live by in this nation for for hundreds of years now, you need more and more laws to enforce that you make sure your neighbor doesn't steal from you. Make sure that, these things. So you have more and more government, more and more restrictions that have to be imposed because you don't have that internal self-governance, so to speak, right?
Absolutely. And what do we see in Washington, D.C. right now? To take this argument just a step or two further, we see reams and reams and reams upon laws coming out of Washington, D.C. to replace the 10 simple laws that we've said are unacceptable to us. And then what we have is the absurdity of these laws telling us how to do everything in our lives, down to the point of how to use the bathroom. Literally, we now have laws that are dictating how to use the bathroom, rather than just honoring the time-tested truths, the self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator as the context for true human liberty and liberation. Chesterton also used this analogy. If you want to build the biggest playground in the world and let your kids enjoy playing on that playground, you better build a fence. In other words, there is no freedom without a fence, because if the fence isn't there, the kids will either run out into the road and get killed, or they'll be afraid and huddle in the center of the playground because you're haranguing them, policing them, and yelling at them and saying, stay away from the edges. It's the paradox of discipline and freedom. There is no freedom without a fence. And that fence of God, those time-tested truths, is what's been proven throughout the course of human history to give us the greatest measure of human freedom that we've ever enjoyed.
I just, as I'm reading in the scripture, particularly like Proverbs and things like that, and it talks about consequences. I mean, there's always, it's like, hey, if you do this, if you go into the prostitute or whatever, these things are going to happen to you. Or if you, if you're lazy and you sleep a little bit too much, you're going to go broke, right? That type of stuff. But it's all based, like you said, on the 10 simple. And it just seems like today, God's being proven true. In a negative way, but, seems like he's being, the word of God's coming alive right as we watch.
It is. And I think, again, it's an opportunity. There's a crisis. There's a vacuum. Something's going to fill it. We can fill it with what Christ filled the vacuum of his time with. And how did he answer these questions of his time? He basically didn't argue and debate. He just asked a rhetorical question. So when he saw the consequences of a broken worldview, what did he say? Well, which one of you wants to throw the first stone? Why do you call me Lord? Whose face is on this coin? So Christ, almost always in the face of the vacuum, in the crisis, he would ask a rhetorical question to expose the brokenness and the fault of the broken worldview and cause people to drop their stones and walk away. And then, once they've done that, we can answer the question. We can answer the question with the big idea, the best idea, the first thing, rather than being too easily satisfied with these second things that our culture wants to run after aimlessly.
I couldn't agree more. We talked about, you said the 2 commandments. Of course, in Scripture, in the Bible, it says, love God with your whole heart, your whole strength, and your whole soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. In our culture now, they love the idea of loving your neighbor as yourself as a slogan, but those go together. Unless you have your foundation in these moral values in God, it's impossible to love your neighbor as yourself, wouldn't you say?
Well, and if you truly love yourself as that scripture implies, you've got to have the right view of yourself. And if you don't, and Chuck Colson used to tell us this all the time, every worldview debate starts with the definition of man. Who are you? Are you the product of the primordial ooze? Did you rise up out of the swamp? Are you nothing but an evolved amoeba? Or are you the Imago Dei? Are you made in the image of God? There's a huge difference between the Imago Dei and the Imago Dog. If you're nothing but an animal, you're going to treat other people like animals. But if you really believe that you're the Imago Dei, you're made in the image of God with culpability and responsibility, then you will act accordingly, and you will also treat other people with dignity rather than using them as objects.
And the latter there, treating other people with dignity versus objects, is what just about everybody would actually say they want in this culture, and yet they're doing just the opposite based on the actions and what's being taught to them in schools.
Well, I would go back to, again, terrible ideas. Garbage in, garbage out. We've taught our kids that everything's relative. Doesn't matter what you believe as long as it works for you. And we've also taught them for decades that they're nothing but the product of the primordial ooze, that they rose up out of the swamp, out of the soup, and they have no more moral significance than a dog, a pig, a cat, or a cow. In fact, PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, actually says that. There's no difference between an infant boy as opposed to a baby pig, a baby cat, or a baby cow. Therefore, if we are equating ourselves with the animal, why are we surprised to find people that actually behave like animals, and they run about trying to satiate their every libidinous appetite like an animal would?
You know, we're visiting with Dr. Everett Piper on the show here, and I'm fascinated. I want to know more. This is something we talked about. We live in a state here where everything's upside down. I mean, we've just now passed a law in our state where on your driver's license you can pick male, female, or X. I mean, it's just, when you think about how lost you can get when you teach this moral relativity, we're living it right here. So
yep.
More after that.
Yeah, well, and be sure to check it out. Not a Daycare, The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth, Why I'm a Liberal and Other Conservative Ideas, and The Wrong Side of the Door, all written by Dr. Everett Piper, our guest today. And don't forget, during the break, you should call a friend and tell them to tune in, because this is an awesome show. My name's Doug Bassler.
And my name is Marty McClendon. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Eyes on Washington with Doug and Marty on AM 1590. The Answer.
So don't you move, Washington. We got our eyes on you.
That's right.
This is Doug Bassler.
And Marty McClendon. This is Eyes on Washington. And we have our eyes, our hands, our feet, you name it.
You know, we're here for we're in for the full deal.
We are.
So be so easy, I think, to just run away. But our guest today, Dr. Everett Piper, author of 3 great books and probably more that I can't find. He's the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, and I think a champion for just common sense in America today. So, Dr. Piper, thank you so much for being with us.
Again, honored. I appreciate you guys having me on.
So I want to ask you something, because I think this is kind of critical to this entire argument, and that would be, how important is freedom of speech in this situation that we're in?
Well, see, this is, again, the paradox of the days we live in. My first book that I wrote, Why I'm a Liberal and Other Conservative Ideas, why did I title it that? Well, obviously I'm a conservative. You guys have listened to me for the last half hour. I'm a conservative. I believe in conserving things. I'm a conservationist. I conserve the owls and the trees and the whales. Yes, I believe those things are of value, and I believe in conserving clean air and clean water. But I also believe there are more important things to conserve, and those are the time-tested truths of God, those self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator so that we can be free. Now, why did I say why I'm a liberal? Because the classical meaning of liberal was liberty and liberation. A liberal arts education was founded some 1,000 years ago, let's say at Oxford, to do what? To educate a free people in a free society, a free culture, a free church, and a free country. It was an education in liberty and liberation. So it's an education in freedom. And the irony today is, as a conservative, I'm arguing for intellectual and academic freedom more aggressively than my left-of-center counterpart, who wants to shut down the debate and sequester the unpopular idea and silence those who dare disagree with the status quo. Look at Berkeley. Berkeley celebrates itself as being the birthplace of the free speech movement, but yet they shut down somebody like Ben Shapiro because he's a conservative. Oklahoma Wesleyan University, being a conservative Christian institution, is celebrating more academic liberty and intellectual freedom than Berkeley. Berkeley isn't the birthplace of free speech. Bethlehem is, because it's in the words of Jesus. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, that we truly enjoy intellectual and academic freedom.
Wow. And so this idea of liberalism is actually a conservative idea, because that's what, now in human history, we only had two nations that ever had this kind of like property, ownership of property. Everybody gets their own vine, their own fig tree, this idea that, you can be free. And yet, it's these days it seems like the left is saying this is a bad thing.
Well, again, it's the chickens are coming home to roost. Richard Weaver wrote a book in 1948. He titled it Ideas Have Consequences. And what was his point? Ideas have consequences. And why is 1948 critical in this anecdote? It's because Weaver was looking back just a handful of years to what? World War II and the Nazi Holocaust. He was looking back and he was telling his own culture, the German culture, we should have seen this coming. It was as predictable as the sunrise. We have been teaching lousy ideas to our culture, to our kids, and we should have seen the Holocaust on the horizon, because Hitler told us, let me control the textbooks and I will control the state. And therefore, I go back to my point in not a daycare. What you teach in the classroom is always going to be practiced in our culture in very short order. We need to attend to the ideas that we're perpetuating and inculcating in the next generation of leaders. And if we're teaching them to be snowflakes, and that there is no such thing as academic freedom, and that if any idea makes them feel uncomfortable, then we are going to suffer the consequences of losing our ability and losing our understanding of having an open and robust debate and argument in our culture, because somebody will say, I don't like it, and therefore you have to be shut down.
I'm offended. You've triggered me. You've done whatever. You don't agree with my ideology, so you can't speak at all. Yeah, we know.
Well, and the Holocaust was a outpouring of eugenics, and abortion of course is like that as well.
Yep.
So Margaret Sanger and all that, and we're seeing huge consequences, especially in our minority community, like the African American, being devastated by abortion and things like that. Where do you see us on that spectrum right now, as far as where's America at?
Well, I go back to something you guys said before the other break. You started to talk about the definition of what it means to be a free society, and the definition of words in and of themselves. In other words, can we even define what it means to be a human being? Can we define what it means to be a male or a female? Apparently, we've lost the ability to even come to a common understanding of these common definitions. We don't know what a male or a female is any longer, to the point where we've told women that they don't even exist any longer, and that they're nothing but a fabrication and a fantasy of a dysphoric male who raises his hand on a given day and says, I'm a woman. Well, how in the world is that pro-woman? How can you be a feminist if you deny the definition of the feminine? You can't be a feminist if there is no such thing as the feminine or the female.
Wow.
We have to reclaim the high ground of definitions if we're going to engage in a true discussion of what it means to be a free people. Because if people don't exist in an objective way, as an objective reality, if people can't be defined by God rather than some power group in culture, then we're going to start eliminating those individuals that we find to be inconvenient, such as the unborn, or such as the Down syndrome child, or anybody else that we find to be unworthy of our definition of what it means to be a human being as opposed to God's.
Whoa.
That's really, really good. On the way in, and of course, this is once again, we're in Seattle, in a very liberal city, in a state that tends to be more purple, more red around there, as far as conservative values and so forth. And I'm thinking about, we have a big Black Lives Matter movement here in Seattle. And I'm thinking about it, I go, just the definitions. We've talked about terms. Yes, absolutely, of course. Black Lives Matter. But by saying just that, aren't you saying that other lives may not matter? So it's just like.
Well, I mean, Marty, they're saying Black Lives Matter too. I mean, it's kind of what they imply, because it's like, there has been historical problems or whatever.
No, I get it. But it's when you start with those things, even using the English language, right? It's like, well, I think Doug Bassler matters. Well, okay, Doug Bassler does matter. But does Doug Bassler matter to the exclusion of somebody else. So this what Dr. Everett's talking about, Piper's talking about, is these, we have to reclaim the definitions and the terms, the terminology, right?
Absolutely. I mean, stop and think about the way we've lost the control of what words mean. Words like green, it used to mean a color, not a political or economic agenda. Gay used to mean happiness, not licentiousness or sexual license. Left and right and conservative and liberal. I've already gone through how the use of the word conservative has been co-opted and the use of the word liberal has been abandoned. We've lost the ability to even define what a female is. A female is nothing but a fantasy and a fabrication, as I just got done saying. We've lost the ability to have a conversation with people because the definitions of what we're talking about floats with culture. And we can't even define what a marriage is any longer. And the most critical point, even at my institution, I will not hire any faculty member if they can't tell me what the definition of human life is. And what is that definition? God defines the human life. You don't. The government doesn't. No one defines what a human being is other than God. And that human being, therefore, has permanent dignity that can never be compromised by any power base or group of people. If I can't find faculty that understand the definition of a human being, the definition of marriage, the definition of a female, the definition of a male, the definition of what it means to be a free people in a free society, I don't hire them.
Well, yeah, and you would think this would be common sense, but it's not. In this day and age, I think you were talking about it's not a daycare. I think we've done we as a culture have done a terrible job confusing the next generation. About allowing these things to say, it doesn't matter. You can choose what you want to be today or tomorrow, and it's like, no, you can't. You were born a boy. You're a boy. Marriage is this. These values matter because there are consequences, as Doug mentioned before.
And the consequences are always going to be somebody else is going to be disadvantaged because of your selfishness and your narcissism. In other words, if I all of a sudden decide tomorrow that I'm a female, who is going to be disadvantaged because of my decision? A woman. It's the woman who's going to lose her dignity, her privacy, her shower, her bathroom. The woman is going to suffer because of my selfishness, because I have decided that I'm going to define what it means to be male and female rather than accepting God's definitions. Therefore, what happens is women and children are always the first to suffer most as the result of the male libido being unrestrained by those simple principles of God.
Wow. And I looked at a story here on one of the news outlets the other day. Lewis Hamilton, the Formula One champion race car driver, had to apologize because he posted on Snapchat to his nephew, boys don't wear princess dresses. So, but he had to go out and apologize that. Oh, really? I guess boys can wear. So, yeah, can't define a lot of stuff. Our guest, Dr. Everett Piper. We're going to be back with more with him. Go check out the book, Not a Daycare. I think that's a good place to start, but the other books are good too. This is Doug Bassler
and Marty McClendon. This is Eyes on Washington.
Be right back.
Catch me, Mike Gallagher, this evening at 9 with all the national news. But now it's Eyes on Washington with Doug and Marty here on AM 1590, The Answer.
It's amazing what'll happen between 5 and 6 on weeknights.
That's right, especially if you listen to Eyes on Washington right here.
Or on weekends if you're listening on the ACN network.
That's
you never
true.
know.
All across Eastern Washington, that's right.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, we're so grateful for you. This is Doug Bassler.
And Marty McClendon. Welcome back to the show. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for supporting our sponsors.
That's right, because they need you. And we need you, and we need them. We all need each other. It's great. Our guest by way of telephone, all the way from Oklahoma, is Dr. Everett Piper. He is the president of the Oklahoma Wesleyan University, the author of 3 great books. We've been talking about why I'm a liberal and other conservative ideas, and it's amazing. We've been talking about Not a Daycare, the devastating consequences of abandoning truth. And then your other book, Dr. Piper, is The Wrong Side of the Door, Why Ideas Matter. Do ideas really matter?
Well, we've been talking about them for the last hour.
I know, but I just wanted to make sure that I was hearing you correctly.
Yeah. The interesting thing is when I get into a debate with somebody who's progressive or on the left, they inevitably will get agitated because they disagree with my conservative ideas. But yet they're the ones who are saying ideas don't matter, everything's relative, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as it works for you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. but they prove by virtue of their exasperation, by virtue of the energy that they put into the disagreement and the debate with me in the first place, that I'm right and they're wrong. In other words, they're sawing off the very branch upon which they sit. It's a self-refuting claim. It's like watching a dog chase its tail. You get busy. It would be funny if it weren't so sad. I hear this stuff all the time in the academy in particular. Words like this or statements like this. I can't tolerate your intolerance, or I hate you hateful people. I'm sure that nothing is sure. I know that nothing can be known. I'm absolutely confident. There are no absolutes. The list goes on and on. What is wrong with everything I just said? It makes no sense. It's self-refuting. It can't be true to say I can't tolerate your intolerance because it makes you intolerant, and therefore you can't tolerate your very claim that you're using to try to refute your opponent. This type of nonsense in the academy is so prevalent, and it doesn't take that much energy to knock it down. But we haven't taught our kids to have the confidence in the basic Socratic logic to recognize that when you say I'm sure that nothing is sure, you just committed the sin of hypocrisy and duplicity by refuting yourself.
Yeah, exactly right. You've just knocked yourself down. Now, this answers the question that I've asked our listeners and Doug on the air as well. It's like, we've seen this now in the current political culture. You have the left and the right, and these culture war we're going on with the harassments and so forth, where you have the left that was the champion of the worker, the left that was for champion for women's rights, the champion for whatever, championing Islamic countries and Islamic culture that basically is anti-homosexual, anti-women, and you're like, how do you juxtapose your values, your statement, with your alignments? What do you say?
Well, I would suggest that they never really believed that stuff in the first place, because let's take the pro-woman argument, the feminist argument. And the left and the progressives now claiming that they're the feminists, when really, like I just pointed out earlier, they're not. They're misogynists. They're not feminists. You can't be a feminist if you deny that females actually are objective facts. Take women's sports as an example. I would argue that female athletics is almost dead. It's almost non-existent. And why do I say that? Because today, any biological male can raise his hand on a given day and say, I'm a female, and take away your daughter's scholarship, her sport, her shower, her restroom, her dignity, and her very identity. And if that can happen, and it can, and it does, then how in the world can we say that we're going to honor Title IX that requires us to give women equal access to the athletic field? I can't honor Title IX if the government then turns around under the auspices of Title IX and tells me that women aren't real and that you have to deny that they're a biological fact. Again, all we need to do is what I did when the government sent me this stupid letter, the Dear Colleague letter, and said you have to start providing transgender accommodations on your campus. I said, how can I do that and still have women's athletics and women's sports? I will be in violation of the very law that you're using to try to tell me to enforce this transgender nonsense. And I just sent them a letter and said no. And they gave me an exemption.
We have a
That's because they didn't want to have to debate you in public in front of everybody.
Yeah. We have a local example. I won't give the name. Just say there's a private party, political party down south of here that has in their rules that you have to elect. If someone gets elected that's a male for the chair, the vice chair has to be a female. Well, they had one of those circumstances for their own logic where one of the males said, well, I identify as a female. And so they got around that by electing two males, breaking their own rules based on the logic. It's like,
they kicked the biological females out of leadership of that particular political party, the Democrats.
Yes.
That we're going to not name, but they were Democrats.
And then they solved this problem that they created by doing what? They created more rules, more laws to try to control the fact that they couldn't live by the simple common sense laws that there really is a male and a female, and that you should be hiring people by virtue of that fact and not pretending otherwise. In other words, all these little laws rushed in to fill the vacuum of that lunacy.
Well, what I'm hoping for is that we can get more people who are just going to say, you know, that's ridiculous, the emperor's naked, and get them into education. You know, a big fan of Lance Wallnau and the Seven Mountains. You know, that the Christians aren't just supposed to, you know, become Christians and then go hide under a bushel or wherever under a bed, but they're actually supposed to occupy and take those positions, become teachers, become politically, active, become business people.
Right.
that type of thing. And I think that the education realm is desperately in need of more Dr. Pipers. And so we're very grateful for you, sir.
Well, again, I'm grateful that you had me on, and I'm honored to be part of your program.
I have one question, obviously, as we end up this program as well. I know that as a parents of kids, we have a couple of kids in high school still, and other people that are starting out. We know how dangerous this is. You talk about, using our money, pulling kids out and saying not allowing them to consume this garbage. Is critical thinking even being taught anymore about taking the information in and actually evaluating it against a set of standards or allowing? I know with my own daughters who are a sophomore and a freshman, often I'm just challenging them. Say, okay, you've heard a bunch of stuff. You're parroting that stuff you've heard. I disagree with that, but now what kind of critical thinking skills have you learned to actually evaluate what you're hearing?
You're right. They're learning very little because most of our kids, our millennials, are prone to say, that offends me. I don't like that. It's a trigger warning. I feel like it's a microaggression. And they throw the victimization card down rather than actually trying to engage in a debate where they actually show that their ideas are superior to yours. They don't want to do it any longer. Let me put a plug in for two organizations that everybody should send their kids to while they're in high school. Worldview Academy. Worldview Academy is an excellent one-week boot camp in critical thinking and apologetics. And the other one for seniors in high school and even freshmen in college is Summit Ministries in Colorado Springs, Colorado. That's 2 weeks. Both of those programs will teach your kids how to think, how to ask questions, how to think logically, and it's grounded in the time-tested truths of a biblical Judeo-Christian ethic.
Worldview Academy and Summit Ministries.
Okay. Teaching the kids how to think is good, and I'm just really, really grateful. Thank you for writing these books. Thank you for taking the time to go on programs like ours, and to discuss it. We got to get back to the truth. Yes, the truth will make us free, and we're so excited for you. Our guest, Dr. Everett Piper, his latest book, Not a Daycare, available on Amazon.com. Go there, buy the book. And, thank you again, sir, for being on the program. Well, that's
thanks to you guys. Thank you.
You betcha. That's it for another show. But you know what? There's going to be more. There's always more. We've always got something else, but that was a good one.
It was great.
That was one for the record books. This is Doug Bassler.
And Marty McClendon, Eyes on Washington.
See you next time.
God bless. God bless America.
Thanks for listening to Eyes on Washington with Marty McClendon and Doug Bassler. Learn more about the program and listen to past broadcasts at EyesOnWashingtonMedia.com. Did you like today's show? Well, you're also invited to like the program on Facebook at Facebook.com/EyesOnWashingtonMedia. Send any questions or comments you might have to radio at EyesOnWashingtonMedia.com. And join Marty and Doug every weeknight at 5 for more Eyes on Washington, right here on AM 1590. The Answer.